this morning we're going to interview Rose Beal. Rose was a young girl growing up in Berlin when Hitler was coming to power. So we're going to talk to her all about that and stuff. Nice to have you here, Rose.
Nice to be here, and I need to correct you already.
Okay.
I was born in Berlin, but I grew up in Frankfurt.
Oh, good. Okay. And what year were you born?
I was born December of 21.
December?
21, 1921.
Okay, December the what?
3rd.
Okay, December 3rd, 1921. Okay, so you were born in Berlin. What did your father do?
My father, we had stores. My parents separated when we were very young. My father moved to France then, and so it was really my mother and my two brothers, the four of us. And my mother had stores, ready-to-wear stores, clothing stores.
How did she get into that business?
It was just without much education and background, retailing, as it was in this country, was an easy business to get into. And I remember when we came to Frankfurt, her brother lived there, and she borrowed 500 marks and started selling clothes door to door. It was shortly, it was after the inflation, and before we knew it, she had one store, and then she had a second one, and then she had a third one. She was very entrepreneurial.
Mm-hmm. So, how old were you when you moved to Frankfurt then?
I was about between 7 and 8 years old. We moved there in 29, yeah.
Okay, and are you the youngest of the children?
I'm the oldest.
Oldest, oh.
I'm the oldest. My one brother was 1 year, less 3 days younger than I, and the other one is 3 years younger than me.
So you have two brothers.
I have two brothers.
Your mother's parents, did they grow up in Berlin too?
No, they came. My mother was born in what was then Austria and became Poland after the First World War, which made me, even though I was born in Berlin, a Polish citizen. And from age 12 on, I always had to have a valid Polish passport. That was like an identification card, and that had a lot to do later as we go on with my coming to America.
Did your mom's, your grandparents, what kind of work did they do? It was in Austria, Poland?
My grandfather did nothing. He was studying the scriptures. That was quite an honor in those days in the little city. He was kind of a learned man, which meant my grandmother, while she was having 8 kids, she did all the work. They had a big farm, they had a pub, and I don't know how she did it, but she kind of raised 8 kids and did all of that work while he was studying, and it was kind of a big honor to have a husband who did that.
What was the name of the town?
Well, it was near, it was a little place called, you'll never be able to spell it, Mościska.
Spell it for me.
Near Lvov. Lvov was the big city. Mościska is spelled, I think, Mosciska. Mościska. And it's near Lvov, which was in German called Lemberg, which was a cosmopolitan big city.
During World War I, any of your relatives get involved in that?
Oh yeah, my father was a sergeant in the Austrian-Hungarian army. And I still have a picture of him with a mustache, this that curled up and a sword dangling and yeah.
Uh-huh. And I forget, what side were they on?
The
Austria-Hungary. Were they with the Germans or against the Germans?
They were with the Germans.
Okay. Allies of the Germans.
Yeah, they were allies of the Germans.
Had he been in the army before the war started?
No.
He
was not a
in or
military
something?
man. He was just, he got in,
Right.
And I
Did
don't
he-
know if I told you the funny story. He had twin brothers. One of them had tuberculosis, and of course when he was called up, but he was turned down, and his twin brother, who was identical, when he was called, he sent the sick one up. So he didn't have to go either.
Yeah.
So that was always one of my favorite stories.
Oh. So, yeah, okay. So they both got turned down, but
So they
by
both
what?
they both got turned down. My father was with the quartermasters, and he liked to have himself photographed in that uniform. It looked pretty good.
Now, was your father Jewish?
Yeah.
And your mother was too?
Yes.
Obviously,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Then, so your grandfather, he wasn't a rabbi, was he? That did all the
No,
studies
they
and stuff?
were even better than a rabbi.
Uh-huh.
My grandfather, he was sitting there and he was smoking these black Turkish cigarettes. He died at age 52 of cancer of the larynx. When he smoked that much.
Sure.
And he's buried in Salzburg. He died in 1915. And that too was an interesting story because right across the border from Austria, there is a German spa. And my mother, who was a young girl then, she was 19, they were taking this sick man and they thought the waters would cure him. Of course, the waters don't cure cancer. And so she had him there, but now she had to get him back into Austria to get him buried. So she had to have permission from the emperor. And the highlight of her life was she had an audition with the emperor.
Oh, is that Franz Joseph?
Franz Joseph,
Oh.
and to get permission to bring the body of her father back for burial there a couple of times, which was kind of an interesting experience.
Huh.
And
So she took him back to Salzburg?
Salzburg, which was Austria, for burial.
Oh, okay.
Because he's there in the old Jewish cemetery.
And he had been at
A
spa.
Yeah,
spa.
they had
And where
mineral,
was that? That was in Germany?
in Germany,
Oh.
called Bad Reichenhall, that was supposed to cure whatever he had, and,
Yeah.
and it probably helped with rheumatism, but not with cancer.
No, yeah. Okay. Did they talk about in Austria and Poland, that area? What do you call them? Pogroms?
Program, yes, my mother's older sister, that's how my mother got to go to Germany. They had the pogroms there, the whoever it was rode in, and her older sister was raped. So the next day they packed off my mother. One of the brothers already was in Germany, and they sent her immediately to Germany to get her out of there because they were afraid they'd come back and attack her.
What was your mother's name?
Sarah,
Oh, Sarah.
that's
And what was her maiden name?
Singer.
Singer?
Yeah.
Huh. It was, I guess it didn't sound like a, I mean, it didn't sound like a Polish, Austrian, German
It's
name.
a German. Oh
Is
yeah.
it Singer?
Singer is German. Means the same thing. You're a singer.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I guess so. Where I'm from, Southern Indiana, we live in German townships. There's a lot of German people around. There were singers that I went to school with and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I thought maybe it was just a shortened name of
No,
some
no,
long
no, no,
German
no.
name or something.
That was the, a lot of the, in the Middle Ages, people named themselves after their professions.
Yeah.
And that was like, my maiden name was Horn, H-R-N. So, that was her maiden name.
Okay. Okay. So your maiden name was
H-O-R-N.
H-O-R-N.
Yeah, Horn.
And that's not an English name. I mean, that's not
It's a German name.
It's a German.
As a matter of fact, our neighbors, and I'll tell you about that perhaps later, who beat up my brother because he couldn't stand it that a Jew had the same name as he had. So.
Okay. So you went to school, I guess, in Frankfurt then?
Most of the time. I started school in Berlin.
Mm-hmm. Did you go to a Jewish school?
In Frankfurt. I went to a very interesting school, though it was a school that was founded and endowed by the Rothschild banking family who originated in Frankfurt. And it was considered one of the best schools in Germany. And a lot of our students were not Jewish because it was such a good school.
Were the Rothschilds Jewish?
Oh yeah, they came originally from Frankfurt, and they endowed that school. They founded it, they endowed it, and it you had to pay. There was a pretty hefty charge. However, the part of the endowment was that if somebody could not afford to pay it, but they were scholastically able to come in, they would be subsidized. They cannot be refused admission because of money. That was, it was, Frankfurt was percentage-wise towards population the largest Jewish community in Germany. Not the most people. Berlin had more people, but as a percentage to general population. And the Rothschilds were part of that. As a matter of fact, the Jewish Museum today is in a villa that belonged to the Rothschild, which they donated.
Were they in banking? Was that?
Yeah, banking. He was very smart, the old man Rothschild. He sent one of his sons to Paris to open a bank and the other one to London. So there are still the big banking houses in London. And then, of course, there was a banking house in Germany, which went by the wayside.
What was the name of your school that you went to?
Philanthrope, like,
spell it.
P-H-A-L-A-N.
Philanthropic or
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And with the I-N at the end. And the reason it was called, would you like to hear how it was founded?
Yeah.
Because it was very interesting. The Rothschilds lived in Frankfurt, and one day the old man heard a young boy playing the violin beautifully, a street player. And he called him up, and he found out that he couldn't read or write. So he hired him a tutor. And pretty soon the young boy said he has a couple of colleagues, also street musicians. Could they come too and be taught by that tutor? And Mr. Rothschild permitted that. And pretty soon there was a whole classroom full of these poor kids. So then the rich Jews of Frankfurt got very upset because these poor kids had a better education than their kids. So that's when he founded the school and the rich kids had to pay, of course. There was a pretty steep fee. And with the provision that anybody who would scholastically be able to go to the school could come, and money should never be. And it was endowed until Hitler closed the school in 1942. And it was that well-known a school that the city of Frankfurt published a book about it. And the book there was one classroom picture in the book, and that was of my class with me standing in the foreground.
Oh, do you have a picture of that?
I have it at home.
Oh,
yeah, I have the book.
I want a copy of it.
I have the book at home.
Oh, I want to see the book too.
It's in German, you know.
Well, that's okay, but... Yeah.
But
your picture's not in German, is it?
no, my picture, I was 14 then. You've seen it, haven't you? So, but it's an interesting story of the school, and the school is still, the building is there, and they're still talking about that school.
How, here we have grammar school and we have high school. How were the schools?
Well, this school, you could start kindergarten through what we call the Abitur, which was really the equivalent of first 2 years of college. You know, it was, you could go all the way through to the same school. And I was fortunate just after the first elementary school classes, when I went into high school, which was called the Lyceum for girls, you know, and the Gymnasium for boys, that my teacher got her PhD and was qualified to teach in the high school. So I had the same teacher, homeroom teacher, from elementary school all the way through high school, which was kind of unusual.
Yeah.
You know.
Did you work while you went to school?
No,
Did you have a job or anything?
Nobody had, kids didn't have a job in those days. You know, we were middle class people.
Yeah.
The kids didn't work. In Germany, you only had to go to school till you were 14. So the poor people, and then you went into an apprenticeship. If you were from the working class, you went to school till you were 14, and then you had a 3-year apprenticeship in whatever profession you would take. But we were kind of a middle-class family. We didn't do that. I went to school.
Did you like sports? Did you do anything like
No,
that?
I wasn't very good at that, and I would only do things I was very good at. You know?
And what were you very good at?
So I was good at studying. I was good at languages. I was good at that sort of thing. And I was an A student. You know, I was.
How many languages can you speak?
Well, I speak fluently read and write, of course, English and German, and I also studied French, which I understand. And then later I studied Latin because I wanted to become an attorney. And there in Germany you still have to be able to read the old Roman law, the Corpus Juris, you know, which you don't have to do here. And
let me see, you were born again and you were after, okay.
I was born right before the German inflation in 22.
Right, yeah. So how did that affect your family, the inflation and all that stuff?
Well, it did. I remember I had a nanny. We had to let her go, except she had no place to go, and so she asked to stay with us for no pay, just for room and board. And we were in contact until we left Germany in 1939. And I remember having played with, as I got older, 3-4 years old, with million mark money. You know, 10 million marks, 100 million marks. Of course, a loaf of bread at 11 o'clock in the morning could be 10 million, and in the afternoon it's 20 million, and the next day was 40 million. So there was, when I tell people I played with millions, they thought we were very rich, but you know, but we had all of this paper going. I don't know how we lived. We somehow managed to struggle through. I think we had a few American dollars. The thing in Europe always was, if I remember, when you had a little money, you put into dollars. So you had dollars. That was the denomination, as it is today. You know, the hard currency. So I think we lived off of that. And then I remember later, my father was still around. He opened a little tobacco store, but that didn't work out. I'm very unclear. This is why my mother went to Frankfurt, where her brother lived, and she borrowed that 500 marks, as I told you before, and started a business.
Your friend, well, the school, were there only Jewish kids at that school?
No, we had a very high percentage of non-Jewish kids because it was such a fine learning institution. It was in a beautiful building. The building, even though Frankfurt was bombed out 90%, that building wasn't touched.
Yeah.
You know,
And what was the atmosphere like between the Jewish kids and the non-Jewish kids?
we didn't know any difference. We were all students, same as here. That was before, but of course then after the Nuremberg laws in 1935, the non-Jewish kids had to leave.
So let's say before, up until that time,
Yeah.
1920, that there was more anti-Semitism in Poland and Austria than there would have been in Germany.
Oh yes. There was, we didn't know any anti-Semitism. We didn't. Do you know what anti-Semitism is? See?
Well, it's people that don't like Jewish people.
It's anti-Semites.
Yeah.
And Jews are Semites.
Yeah. So when did that begin to change in Germany?
Well, it changed pretty rapidly. Hitler came into power on the 30th of January. God, I will never forget that date, 1933. The first boycott of Jewish stores was the following April, when they not just had a quiet boycott, but they put graffiti on all of the store windows and did that sort of thing. So there was, the awareness was created. I was only 11. I just turned 11. So I wasn't that aware. The only awareness I had was my family was very, very upset. My grandmother was continuously crying. He doesn't like Jews. This is going to be very bad for, I remember that very distinctly, for all of my children and my grandchildren, and she kept that up. And my mother, I remember her saying, I said, oh, be quiet already, it isn't going to last. The German people are too smart for that. And so there was this dialogue going on. Then in March, my grandmother had a heart attack and died. So I guess she was the first victim in my family of Hitler. It was 2 months. So the awareness was there. I think the non-Jewish kids gradually left the school. I don't think they waited till 1935. But because I went to a Jewish school, I was pretty well isolated anyway, from the rest. I had a couple of non-Jewish friends. They were customers who had kids, my age, and I kind of was friendly with them. I even went to church with them on Sundays, and but most of my friends were, of course, like as it is today, they were schoolmates, classmates, and they were Jewish. So
these friends of yours, did you stay in contact with them very long? I mean, after all this started happening.
Well, we had a reunion in New York about 5 years
Did
ago.
you really?
Would you believe this? Of our school?
Is that right?
Our school had a reunion.
Did you really? Yeah.
Yeah, 5 years ago in the Catskills in New York, and we brought all of our pictures and whatever we had, and exchanged stories. And
what were the names of your best friends, the non-Jewish friends? In school?
These I don't remember that.
Oh.
I know the people who went to that conference, that meeting in New York 5 years ago, and I must again say my class had 15 people there out of just my classroom. I mean, we had the most people, and we were the noisiest.
I guess what I'm getting at is, did you notice that they weren't as friendly to you as they had been before?
As I said before, no, the couple of non-Jewish friends I had were just as friendly. They didn't, as a matter of fact, as I said, I went there often, like on a Saturday, spent the night, went to church with them. On Sunday, as a matter of fact, I remember one had a confirmation, and the minister called everybody up to, her friends to be blessed, and of course I didn't go up because I was Jewish, and he kind of said, "Come here, little girl, a little blessing can't hurt you." So I remember that very well. So they didn't, they were really good friends, they were really good friends.
Did you have any idea what the non-Jewish people, I mean, obviously we know what the Jewish people thought of Hitler. What did the non-Jewish people think of him?
Well, in the beginning, they thought he was a funny man, As a matter of fact, I heard him speak, and people were kind of, just before he came to power. But on the other hand, later, Germany was in very bad shape. Aside from the street riots, there was great unemployment. They were suffering, the Geneva, the peace that was negotiated after World War I was a very punishing peace. We all know that. We've learned from it. That's why we had the Marshall Plan after. And things were very, very bad. There was a lot of poverty, unemployment. So Hitler made all of these promises, and I must say he made good at them, because I remember all of the young men standing at street corners smoking, and pretty soon they disappeared. They started to work. They worked on the Autobahn, they worked on rearmament, which he wasn't supposed to do,
right.
And he did all of that. So he was like the savior. They thought highly of him, and that. But right from the beginning, there were some people were aware. There were some unsavory kind of things he did, like in February. The Reichstag, the Parliament, went up in flames, and they accused this retarded communist from Holland of having set the fire, which gave him an excuse then to round up all of the communists and send them to concentration camp. So all of that. Then in I think it was March. In March, one of Hitler's oldest friends and colleagues, a fellow by the name of Röhm, who was a founder of the SA, which was the Storm group.
Brown shirts.
The brown shirts. They were becoming very powerful, and he disagreed with Hitler, and Hitler just had him shot. And I remember that day where my mother says, "Don't even go out of the house," because there were armed patrols. So we knew that. Then in April was that a boycott of the Jewish stores. So there were always things, and then talk was beginning about concentration camps and people being rounded up, and as was the communists and the social democrats, and then the Catholics, the priests who started preaching what they always preached, probably brotherly love, which was against the state, and the Protestants, the Lutherans, we were Lutherans there, and the Jew, so there was, people were rounded up for just making what were considered anti-Hitler remarks. My mother was thrown in jail. A couple of guys came into the store, they tried on leather jackets, and when she asked to be paid, she says, they said, "We are not paying any Jew." And my mother made the remark something like, "I'd be in bad shape if I'd have to close the whole German population." Now that was an anti-Hitler remark, and they just took her. The police came.
What did she say again?
She said, "Well, I'd be in fine shape if I had to close, the whole party or something like that, if I have to supply leather jackets to the whole party, that kind of remark, and she was thrown into jail. And then we had an apprentice girl who wasn't Jewish. She said, "Don't you touch that woman. She's a very fine person. I wish you were as fine as she is." So she was thrown into jail too. But these were considered anti-government remarks. So you had to be very careful.
How long was she in jail?
Just a couple of days. Got her out. I had to get her out.
How did you do that?
Well, I went to an attorney who wouldn't take her case because it was political. She was a political prisoner. They didn't touch political prisoners. No attorney. I don't know. I just went up there and talked to them, and she probably would have gotten out anyway. But I want to think that I helped. So.
When did your family start to think about maybe we need to get out of Germany?
Not until 1935, until the so-called Nuremberg law. Are you familiar with that? They had each year a conference, a gathering in the city of Nuremberg. And that's where the policy of the state and the parties were kind of spelled out. And in 1935, that was the first year where you couldn't fraternize. Jews could not fraternize with non-Jews. Jews could not marry non-Jews. Jewish judges could not sit on the bench. Jewish teachers could not teach in non-Jewish schools. Jewish students could not go to non-Jewish schools. Our population in our school, which was 1,500, kind of doubled after that. You could not have, if there was a man in your house, listen to this one, if you had a male in your household, you could not have a household employee under 45 years for fear that, I guess, a male get married, over 45 it didn't matter. You would go straight to hell then. Yeah. So, and we could not go to public swimming pools, for instance. They had signs out there, no Jews or dogs allowed. Before that, it only said no dogs allowed. Now they added the word Jews. You couldn't go to theater, to the movies. There were signs, no Jews wanted. And you were really, I guess the word is ghettoized. You were driven, though you did not live physically in a ghetto, you kind of were forced to just stay with your own. And the people who were already in mixed marriages, the non-Jewish partners, spouses, were encouraged to get a divorce. So, it was called Rassenschande. You know what that means? You shame the race. Shame, race shame, That means if you were caught going with somebody who was non-Jewish, both of you were liable to be punished because it was the law. It was the law, the race law, the Rassengesetz. So it was very interesting. One time it was raining, and I went to shelter in a house, and it was near the university with a couple of university students, and we got to talking, and then the rain stopped, and they invited me to have an ice cream with them, go to a cafe, and I told them I couldn't go, and they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I'm Jewish, and you get into trouble, and I get into trouble." And they looked at me and they said, "Well, you can't be Jewish, you talk just like we do, you look just like we do." And I guess they had been so brainwashed that, they thought you had to have a hooked nose, probably horns, and maybe even a tail, I don't know. But I'll never forget that. They just didn't think. I looked like one of them, but I couldn't go. I could not accept their invitation, because if somebody would have seen us together, they would have been in deep trouble, and so would I.
So so after high school, were you still going? Okay, you said you were in university. Are you still talking about this?
Well, I graduated. What happened? The Cambridge Prep School in England selected 2 schools in all of Germany to put a branch, an experimental branch, and our school was selected. So I went to Cambridge Prep School. So I learned to speak English because all the subjects were taught in English. And that was very interesting.
And that was at the...
At my school,
at
at the
Rothschild's,
Philanthropie.
yeah, okay.
The Philanthropie. That's how it was pronounced. And so I went to that school. I graduated when I skipped a couple of classes, not because I was so smart, but they were they knew that people were leaving, and they tried to cram as much in education into the time frame that we had. So I managed to graduate at 15, then I went to the Cambridge Prep School. So when I came to this country, I could go to college right away, which I didn't do because I had to go to work.
Okay. But, so, I mean, was your family talking about leaving Germany?
In 35, we applied. We wrote to our relatives in America to send us, we needed a certificate, an affidavit that we would not become a public charge. So it had to be somebody of some means and credibility. And because we had the Polish quota, it took us 3.5 years to get the American visa, which, there was the quota system. There were X amount of people allowed to come in every year.
Right. If you weren't Polish, if you had been German, how long would it have taken?
I don't know, but it would have been less time. The German quota was considerably larger than the Polish quota, because nobody wanted Polacks here. So the German quota was, but in Europe, it's not, your nationality is not where you're born, it's where your parents were born. As a matter of fact, since age 12, every foreigner, and I was considered a foreigner, an alien, had to have a valid passport. I had to have a valid Polish passport on me at all times. And that wasn't just because of Hitler, that was always that way.
Yeah. So,
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, really.
I think it's still that way. I'm not sure, but I still think it's...
How did you like the university, Cambridge?
The prep school?
Prep school, yeah.
It was very interesting. I had 2 very handsome teachers.
Were they
from England? From
British?
And they didn't speak any German. I mean, we had to... it was like, already going to a school here. And it was the only English schooling I had, because I never went to school here. So it was interesting. I learned a lot. I learned the language, which both my brothers didn't know.
So, did you, when you left in 1939, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, were you in school all that time? Okay.
No, I left school in 38. I left school and I went to, which was sort of a finishing school, a Jewish school. It was called a household school. You knew how to, women's work was getting married and being a housewife, how to do. And I went there. I don't think I went there for a full year, maybe 9 months. There were very turbulent times. There was always something happening, and frankly, my head wasn't with school, and it was just at that point became a matter of surviving, daily survival.
So you were pretty fearful by this time?
Oh, well, you kind of kept to yourself, and you kept out of the way, out of harm's way as much as you could. And harm's way could be anything. Harm's way could be walking on the street and somebody coming towards you and not liking you. I mean, my brother was beaten up and had a couple of teeth knocked out by a guy who had the same name as we had, and his thing was a Jew shouldn't have that name. You know, that's on his way home from school. But he got his revenge later.
Oh, how's that?
How is that? When he was with the counterintelligence corps, and he came back and he looked him up. So. But that, you pretty much kept to yourself. We were very, very lucky. Our teachers made a life for us. We had cultural events, we had parties. I still have pictures, you know, of a
Were
New
your
Year's party.
British teachers, were they Jewish also?
No, they weren't Jewish. They left pretty much the same time I left, you know, the beginning of '39, when everybody knew that war was going to happen.
That's what I was going to ask you. You pretty well knew it was going to.
Well, I'll tell you, in March of '39, we were sitting in the American consulate waiting for our visa. We were called in for the issuance of our visa. And I remember the vice consul who talked to us saying, now that you have the visa, just make sure you're on an American ship going to the U.S. because it looks as though there's going to be a war, and the ships, of course, always get returned to their country of origin. So you need to be on an American ship, and we were. But we knew before, we were surprised there wasn't a war before. You know, the first time in '36 when the German military occupied the demilitarized zone west of the Rhine, you know, near the French border, and just threw the Frenchmen out, we had kind of hoped that something would happen then, and nothing happened. And then we were almost sure that when Hitler marched in '38 into Austria, that hopefully, we were hoping for a war just to topple Hitler, to get rid of him. And nothing happened then. And then, of course, in '39, we had Chamberlain, the peace hero, you know, and all of that. So we knew. But then when Hitler marched into, he had already gotten the part of Czechoslovakia was given to him by Chamberlain, and that he just marched into that. Then, and the first time I really heard it expressed was by the American consulate official saying war is imminent. So we knew that.
Now, by this time, were there concentration camps around?
Oh yeah, concentration camps happened very early, because where were they going to put all the communists and all of the people? We heard about that before. I had a relative who was a physician in Vienna. The day Hitler marched into Austria, he was taken to a concentration camp, and he was there for over a year. So, and the only reason he got out, I told them that before that they needed hard currency, and the family had dollars, and they kept bailing him out, and it was like blackmail. The more you gave him, the more you wanted. So finally somebody says, just say there isn't any more money, and maybe there wasn't any more, I don't know. And then they sent him, and they took him in on a trumped-up charge, supposedly having done abortions, which he didn't do. He wasn't a surgeon, he wasn't, you know, he was a general family practitioner, and of course ruined his life, you know. Anyway, so...
Did he survive it? I mean,
oh
was
yeah,
in there all...
he got out in '39, just before the war, and the war had already started, and and there was a Polish division of the RAF there, and he did. He fled Austria and he got as far as France, and then hit the southern France, which wasn't occupied. And then he's telling the story. They hired a guide and they walked. You know, you could hire these people who would smuggle you across the border, and they walked at night across the Pyrenees into Spain. And he said his little boy, who's now a doctor in New York, he had to carry him, and he sedated him because they were afraid that the child might cry. But anyway, when they arrived, then they got into Portugal. He became sort of the official doctor of that Polish division of the RAF, except before they even started, that division was, dissolved. I mean, it was very complicated, and the Canadian government made him an offer to go onto the Prince Edward Island. They had lost their doctor, who was in the army now. If he'd practiced there for the duration, he wouldn't have to put in, that extra year that a physician has to do. And he did that, and he practiced there till way after the war because he really liked it there. And so there was an order of nuns who were the nurses, and they built him a hospital then, and it was really very nice for him. And he retired from there and went to New York. He worked there until his retirement, and they loved him. He loved the people on the Prince Edward Island. So he's.
So when you got out, it was your mom, your mom, and your
my
two brothers. Okay, yeah. And that was. Do you remember the date that you left?
I sure do. April of '39. I don't know the day, but I know it was April of '39. We got the visa.
And do you remember the ship that you?
Yeah, it was called the President Harding. It left from Le Havre, and it then became a troop transport. And then I think they just scuttled it after that. It was.
And did you? Were there any stops along the way before you got to New York, or did you went to New York?
We went to New York, and the interesting part, they were the last prisoner of the Lincoln Brigade, the American brigade of the Spanish Civil War that had been interned in France, southern France, until then. But then, because the Americans didn't want to have anything to do with them either, the Lincoln Brigade. But since war was so close, they decided they better bring those boys home. And they were on the ship with us and told me all about America. They also told me all about the Spanish Civil War.
And they had been, they were prisoners where?
They were when Franco, they lost.
No, I know. I mean,
yeah, they were interned in Toulouse in southern France.
Okay.
They had been there already over a year, and they couldn't get back into America because they were.
Okay. So Franco's guys captured him, but they were with the Germans.
But they didn't. America wouldn't let him come back.
Oh.
They were communists. The Lincoln Brigade,
yeah.
Because they served as, what do they call that, under a foreign flag,
Well, okay.
Under a foreign flag, they wouldn't let him come back, and they were interned in this camp in southern France,
okay.
not by Franco.
I see.
I learned that later. They explained it to me, but I didn't understand
I see
it.
What you mean. Yeah.
But then when war was about to break out, they figured, well, if they are Americans, they better send them home.
Yeah. Right.
So they did send him home.
What did they tell you about the Spanish Civil War?
Well, just, what was happening and what the fascism, and of course we knew all about fascism, and we knew about the war, because Hitler had all these newsreels about this wonderful man, Franco, who was just trying to get rid of the communists and all of that. So, and I've never seen people so happy about coming home.
Yeah.
I mean, they were just elated. I remember when we disembarked, their families were waiting, and they hadn't seen them. They went over there in '36, and they were just the happiest guys. And I stayed friendly with a couple of the guys further on,
So they weren't Bolsheviks or anything like
No,
that.
they were anti-fascists. They were anti-fascists. I mean, in those days, you were either a communist, an anti-fascist, which was the equivalent of being a communist, like we had until the McCarthy era, or you were a fascist. Just so these guys, no, they were left wing, politically, but they were not.
Okay, and the word fascist comes from
Italy, from Latin.
Yeah.
Latin, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascia, but you know what it means?
No.
Okay.
What?
A fascia is.
Wasn't it a thing?
Yeah. It's a thing. I mean, it's well, yeah. It can be that, or it can be in your wrist. The tendons that all run together. It's how you join things together.
Oh, how you join.
That was why we're all for one for all kind of thing, sort of thing. And because a fascia, it's just like if you have a bunch of, say, small twigs, and you tie them all together, then they're real strong.
Because I remember the emblem, I think it was in Italy, was kind of like reed, or corn.
Like that.
Yeah. Put together. Yeah, I mean, vaguely.
So, do you remember seeing the Statue of Liberty for the first time?
That was the most incredible thing, and I always cry when I try not to cry. This was incredible, coming into New York Harbor on Saturday night at sunset and see the Statue of Liberty. And everybody being on that side of the ship, to look at it. So that was really incredible, just incredible.
Did you go through Ellis Island?
No, we were, very legitimately picked up and by my relatives.
Okay, so I thought everybody that came had to do that.
No, maybe we disembarked in Ellis Island, but all I remember is we got off, there were these big halls, and our luggage went there. But I also remember a doctor coming on board. They were very frightened in those days, I don't know why, about glaucoma, the eye disease, and they examined us for that, and the people who came from the Middle East were on the ship. They were detained and really examined, and we were just given, perfunctory look, because that's a disease you could tell by just looking at people's eyes,
Did your relatives live in New York?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
my uncle, they were originally from Germany,
Were they like cousins or?
No, it was my father's brother. It was an uncle and an aunt, and they had 3 children our age, and we kind of, see, I told you that Statue of Liberty always makes me cry.
Yeah, I can well imagine that. So did you go to school, or did you get a job?
My brothers were of school age. I was not. I arrived on a Saturday night. We knew jobs were hard to get. We were told this. This was the tail end of the Depression. So on Monday, the only job you could get was as a domestic. And on Monday, all the domestic agencies were on the east side, on Lexington Avenue, New York. I got instructions how to go on the subway from the west side where we lived to the east side. I got a job on Monday. I arrived Saturday, got a job on Monday, and started working on Tuesday as a domestic. And boy, did they ever take advantage of me. I worked like from 6 in the morning till 10, 11 at night. Did the house, had a 2-year-old child. Boy, you don't know what work is, Sarah. And then I made the mistake of telling them I knew how to cook. So I cooked and served and did all of that. My brothers had to go to school. My youngest brother went to school with Henry Kissinger. because the Kissingers lived like a few houses down from us on the Upper West Side. And Mrs. Kissinger, he in his memoir says she was a caterer, but I only remember her, she baked cakes. And for special occasions, if you had the money, you had Mrs. Kissinger bake you a cake.
Oh.
So, and that was interesting.
Is
The
he
boys
Jewish?
going to,
Was Kissinger Jewish?
oh yeah, he's one of the Holocaust, one of the survivors. And he came from, not far from us, from a city called Fürth. And if you're interested, I have his I bet you have enough to read, because I have his thick book about his memoir,
yeah.
you know. And yeah, he does. Well, his accent, how can you, nobody
Accent.
speaks that way.
So your brothers went to, was that a Jewish school?
No, they went to George Washington High.
Oh.
You know, George Washington High, and one of them got to graduate. The other one had to go to war. You know, the one who graduated also was taken to the army, but he had the opportunity of graduating.
Right.
My brother, whose memoirs you have, he graduated after he got out of the army, and then they both went to UCLA. You know.
Do you remember what you were doing on, was it September 1st, 1939, when Hitler went into Poland? Do you remember hearing about that, or what you were doing?
Oh yeah, well, we were already hanging on the radio since, you know, the day before. I was at a cousin's house, and it was happening, and we knew it was going to be the end of Hitler. We just knew it. There was nobody as happy about the war as we were, you know, because it had to come to a head. And I heard later from concentration camp victims that when they saw the Allied planes flying over, they just hoped they would bomb the camps. Just they didn't mind dying, you know, if that was the end of it. So yeah, we were there, and but the interesting story to me later was, how did Hitler justify, because he always said he wanted peace and everybody attacked him. He virtually, part of the German history then was that the Germans brutally, they went across the border and brutally attacked German families. I mean, I was wondering, how is he going to justify walking, I mean, with Austria was liberating them, but how is he going to justify bombing Warsaw? You know, that was retribution for the Poles who went across the border and did just gruesome deeds to German citizens. And the German people, I guess, believed it or wanted to believe it.
Oh, that was
That was the
propaganda.
story, the propaganda
that he was
putting
putting
out.
Yeah.
You know, and so anyway, the war, you know, and
Is there any way that you could think of that the German people could have gotten rid of him on their own, or is he like this Saddam Hussein? You know, that you think that if they get fed up.
No, I'll tell you, it was a little different situation. Hitler, Goebbels, you know, was his propaganda minister. They were very clever. There was just a gradual brainwashing. And by the time all of this, plus the fact too, when he occupied the demilitarized, the zone, the Rhineland zone, his ad was, this is our country, we can do what we want. He gave them a lot of pride, which they didn't have. And he got the unemployment off the rolls. He was like the savior. By the time they didn't realize what was happening. Even the beginning of the war. I mean, look at the Poles doing all these terrible things. It was only in the middle of the war when they really knew what was happening. And that's when the generals, the military, tried to do the coup and all of that. You know, you see it on the History Channel now, and it's, but it, you know, the German people, they didn't want to topple him. It was a, you know, I've always explained it like we were gradually brainwashed that we were inferior, and they were gradually brainwashed that they were superior. You know, and they, all of the things that were done unto them, after, you know, with the Geneva Peace Treaty, which was very, very difficult for them. And I'm just glad we learned from it and did have the Marshall Plan. Although when I first witnessed the results of the Marshall Plan when I went to Europe in '52, and I was in England, they still had austerity. In England, still had rationing. I went to France, they didn't have rationing, but you knew it was a poor nation. And then I went into Germany, it was like the victorious nation. You know, I mean, as a matter of fact, the Israelis made the joke at the time. They had austerity, and they said, well, how can we stop this? And they said, well, you declare war on America. And he said, what do you mean you declare war on America? They're going to defeat you. He says, yeah, but look what happened in Germany. So, anyway, and that was very hard for me to take. I left, I was there for 1 day, and I just cut out, because I went to the opera that evening, everybody was there, and I was thinking, we've been trying to float bonds in Los Angeles to build a music center for years, and we couldn't do that. And there is Germany, you know, just doing, but now I understand that was the best thing we could have done, that Marshall Plan, in order to avoid what happened, you know, in Geneva.
Do you remember what you were doing on December 7th, 1941?
Yes.
What's that?
I was sitting in a theater in New York City, and I was watching Jekyll and Hyde with Ingrid Bergman and Spencer Tracy, and the lights went on, the screen went blank, and they said Pearl Harbor has been bombed. If there are any servicemen in the audience, they need to immediately report to their posts. Isn't that funny how you remember
Oh, well, yeah.
things like that? Remember? Do you remember?
Well, no, because I was only 2 years old, but I remember where I was when John Kennedy was killed, for instance.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So was that, could you see that coming, or were you surprised by that?
No, I didn't know enough about history and world affairs. At that time, I was not surprised. It just didn't. I was happy that we then declared war, because by that time the war had dragged on, and I knew that the Americans, with all our manpower and materials, the war would end.
Okay, now did you have contact with your relatives back in Germany?
They were all dead by then. They were all gassed or shot, or most of them were gassed.
Now, before you got out, had any of them been taken, other than the one in Austria, had any of them been taken?
No.
But
the major roundups were after the war started. That was the major thing. But we know 5 of them were shot on the street. I know there was the husband and the 2 sons were shot, while the mother and the daughter had to look on, and then they were shot. And that was told to the surviving daughter by an eyewitness, who of course told us. The rest of them, one uncle survived. He escaped a death march. As the Russians and the Americans were coming in after the war, the Germans evacuated the concentration camps and put them in the reverse death march, and he escaped one of those, and he told us that, his 2 daughters and his wife, which was my mother's sister, were gassed. immediately taken off the transport and sent to the gas chambers. And one of the daughters lives in England. She was in Israel but married a British soldier, and then, you know, as a matter of fact, we will see her again this year. And and we knew the rest of them, which is gone. You know. So we assumed they were gassed, which seemed to be the most expedient way.
Did you ever write back and forth? Did you ever correspond with any of them after you were in the United States?
Well, you couldn't. I could correspond through the Swiss Red Cross with my father, who lived in southern France, and we did that until he died, and he died in 41 of a natural, you know, he had a heart attack. And that went through the Swiss Red Cross. It was interesting. They kind of were delivering mail, but my remaining cousin was in England. Of course, I'm in touch with her. You know, she's meeting us again in Germany this year, and she's come here. But there was nobody left. All of my mother's brothers and sisters, and my father's, my cousins, they were all killed.
So, you're in New York, and now it's 1941, and the war has started. So, and a lot of things going on as far as did you continue working as were you still working as a domestic?
No, I wasn't working as a domestic.
What were you doing then?
I was interestingly working in an office that did, and my brother worked in that same office. They sorted diamond in the diamond industry because the commercial diamonds were very much in demand. You used them, they ground them up and used them in the inside of rifles, and so I was working there. But I was already married then.
Oh.
And I was married to a man who was an actor. And he...
what was his name?
His name, Marcel Lerner. And he, through his contacts, he was quite well known in Vienna.
Lerner?
Yeah. And one of his teachers, who was Otto Preminger, asked him to come out. And we came out, and we were here like 1 week, and president. And he went into the service. So, and after the war, they didn't need anybody with a German accent anymore.
What did he do in the service? Yes.
He was, as a matter of fact, he was in the Battle of the Bulge. He was in the 3rd Armored Division. And I didn't know where he was. Of course, they couldn't tell us, in the letter. But yet, I'll never forget that the Hollywood paper had a picture, and it was in the paper. It says, former Hollywood actor photographed at, and showed you where it was. So I knew it was. That's where it was,
Yeah.
So, but then after the war, I got a divorce. I was 18 when I got married. I mean, I was nearly too swift, Sarah. Don't do that.
So you got married in New York? Is that where you met him then?
I met him in New York. I got married. I met him. I was going out with a German count who turned out to be a spy who was deported to South America. And he kind of befriended me, although I never went anywhere with him without my brother, as a chaperone, and said he wanted to marry me and all of that, because I was like he had me on his arm, and he could get into all of these circles that were the people who had, not necessarily Jewish. I remember there was a German poet, Rilke, his name was. There were all of these intelligentsia from Germany and the things. So I don't know how he knew them, but he always, we were there. We were there. And I remember we went to the Cafe Vienna in New York, and I was sitting at the bar, and this Count von Egelhoff, went to the men's room, and what later became my husband was sitting next to me, and he said to me, "You know, a Jewish girl like you shouldn't go out with this guy. There's something very shady about him." And I said to him, "Well, why don't you mind your own business?" You know. So we went. That's how we met. And then he asked me, he was in a show in New York, if I wanted to see it, and he left me passes, and we got to know each other. And this guy really, I don't know when my brother went to the police or I don't know who he went to, and told them there was something suspicious about him, and he had no visible income, but he always had a lot of money, you know. And anyway, he was deported to South America, where all the good Germans were deported to. So that was my first boyfriend in America. I mean, it was strange, very strange. He was very, very formal guy. As a matter of fact, I once went out with him in evening clothes, and I didn't have gloves that covered the elbows. You know, in those days you had gloves. He said, "The future Baroness needs to know how to dress." That was me. Get me a glass of water, please. Yeah, I hadn't thought about him for a long time.
Do you have
But
picture
of him? No.
Yeah.
No. You know, if I remember the first time he took my brother and me to dinner, the bill was $19. Well, I made $9 a week. You know, that was a tremendous amount of money. And I really loved it. And to get to meet all of these famous people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so did you, while your husband's overseas, did you continue working for the diamond, in the diamond?
No, but once we came out here,
Okay.
I worked,
So what year did you come out to California?
Just about 2 months after.
Oh, so
No, after Pearl Harbor, we went to Cleveland. He had an engagement in Cleveland, and we were there for about 3-4 months, as long as the show lasted. And then we came out here, and I went to work for a restaurant on Hollywood and Vine. You know, it was called the Melody Lane. And I worked first as a hostess, then as a cashier, and then I sort of became the night manager. And that's why on Fridays, the Marines and the Navy, everybody came there on leave. I'll never forget that. And I got to know quite a few, you know. As a matter of fact, when I was a cashier, there were some Marines that came in from San Diego on leave, and they gave me money to hold. And I had put the money in an envelope because they were afraid they'd spend it all or they'd get rolled. And I remember my boss opening the safe, and he said, "What are all these envelopes doing?" And I explained to him that I'm holding money for all of these soldiers, for all of these Marines. And he just looked at me kind of funny.
Yeah.
And Hollywood was quite the place during the war. You know, it was the Hollywood Canteen.
Did you ever go to the Hollywood Canteen?
No, I wasn't allowed. I couldn't go in. You couldn't just go in.
Oh, you had to be a
service person or a celebrity or somebody working there. You couldn't go in. I didn't buy it, and the boys told me a lot about it. And
was your husband never in any movies, or did he just act on
no,
stage?
No, he never got to make any movies here. Yeah. So as I said, he was here a couple of weeks. And he was called in.
So did you work at the restaurant?
At that restaurant
all during the war?
Yeah, we were. This was We were frozen. I was frozen. You know, it was a job freeze. You couldn't change any. It was a necessary. You know, I worked there all during the war, and I loved it. Well, really, you know, I got my food taken care of, and all I needed to pay for was my little apartment. When I closed the place up at 2 o'clock at night, I had the Hollywood squad car drive me home. You know, it was. I met Edgar Bergen, who worked up the street in the show. I met Errol Flynn. Well, I met a lot of very interesting people there, and it was fun. I mean, I was, what, 20 years old?
So after the war is over, then what happens?
Well, my mother said to me, this is really not a career for you. You know, restaurant work was really looked down on.
And what, okay, so was your mother living out in
My mother had come out from New York. My brother had come out. My mother came out. My other brother was with the CIC, still in Germany, you know. And she said, that's not a career for you.
Yeah. What was your mother working too here in
Yeah,
Boston?
my mother went in New York already. When the war started in Europe, she lied about her age, and she became a nurse, a practical, you know, licensed nurse, not a registered nurse. And she loved that. She loved anything that had to do with doctors. So.
And did she do that in LA too when she came out?
She did that in LA, not in a hospital, but private patients, and you know, she took care of movie star. You know, it was very.
Yeah.
She loved it. She was a caretaker. You know.
Yeah. Now tell me, your brother had a pretty interesting wartime career. You want to tell me a little bit?
Both of them. Well, one of them went to Europe.
What's their names now?
Bernard went to Europe, and he was with the infantry, and then, you know, got this opportunity with the CIC, the Counterintelligence Corps, and he had a very, you know, would take too long to get some very interesting experiences. One of the most interesting, in my opinion, were not all of the women he met, but was when the Americans finally apprehended Bruckner, who was Hitler's adjutant, and they had him in the prisoner of war camp, and they were looking for a volunteer to go. They didn't at that time.
B-R-U.
Umlaut C-K-N-E-R. As a matter of fact, a picture of him is in that book.
Okay.
And they really, they thought Hitler was dead. They didn't, you know. They wanted to know. They asked for volunteers to pose as a prisoner of war and go in and bunk with him, you know, and see what he could find out. My brother volunteered, and he went in, and they gave him a false identity. You know, he was the son of somebody in another region, so they, you know, they couldn't. And he slept with him in the same bunk for 2 weeks. And what my brother feared most was that if he talks during the night, he would speak English. You know, that was his big fear, all of it. But he couldn't find. Bruckner just insisted that Hitler was dead. You know, and he couldn't find out. And then, when he realized that, he forgot he was wearing. You know, he was a German prisoner of war, and he started walking out of the camp, and they had these Polish guards who were just waiting. She says, "Don't shoot! I'm one of yours. You know, I'm an American." So that I thought was a pretty interesting experience, being sleeping and eating with Bruckner. You know, so and all. You know, did you read anything in that book yet? Go towards the end. The beginning won't interest you too much.
The beginning I looked at it a little bit.
Oh,
it's a little racy, you're right.
So, you Now, my other brother...
What was his name?
Sal. He was sent to the Pacific Theater. And they sent Americans back to the States to learn German so they could they could work in Germany, but then my other brother spoke perfect German. He was sent to the Pacific, So that was a little, that's the way it worked in those days.
Yeah.
And then he was with my younger brother, he was with the military police in Tokyo. So to make sure that the boys wouldn't go to the geisha houses.
Yeah.
So he says the best way to do that was to quarter yourself into one of them. So, I mean, things were obviously very loose because my brother also tells, he found a Russian wounded soldier in the woods in Czechoslovakia someplace, and he traded him. He wanted a Russian bodyguard because it was a big guy who hated the Germans. His wife was killed by them, his child. He traded him to the Russian army for an American Jeep. And I said, well, how did you have an American Jeep to get away? He says, we just had it. They did, I mean, it was kind of shortly after the war, pretty loose over there. And sure enough, he had Alex with him. And if a German, he said, some of the Germans, as I said, were very arrogant, and they wouldn't answer his question, and my brother would say, well, maybe I don't speak German well enough. Come on, and he yelled, Alex, come here. And they see this great big Russian in the Red Army uniform. He says, they talked. He said, because this guy, he says, he looked like a mad dog when he saw a German. They had burned down his village, and his wife and his kid. So these kind of things weren't regular procedure, but they did. He was offered, a lot of the German industrialists and business people were afraid that the Americans would confiscate their businesses, which of course we didn't do. So they offered a lot of positions to the guys as front men. My brother was offered to be the president of a firm called Café Haag, which was the decaffeinated coffee people. They were the only ones in Europe at the time. So he was offered that position, which was really in effect fronting that. And my brother assured them that the Americans wouldn't do that. And he realized that he was way behind his studies. He wanted to become a physician. And even more so after he saw the slaughter and the murder, he always wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to be a pediatrician, but he pretty much changed his mind after he was there. He just wanted to heal, and he came back and then had the opportunity in the GI Bill of Rights, as did my other brother, who ended up, he wanted to become a psychologist, but he ended up in special education, which was a very new field. There was only one school in California, which was in San Jose, and he did a year's internship there, and then liked it so much he decided he isn't going to hang out his shingle. He's going to do that. He still lives in San Jose, so we've had interesting lives.
Yeah. So your mom tells you that there's no future in continuing working at the Melody Lane restaurant.
The restaurant, which was fun.
So then what did you do next then?
Somehow I met an accountant, and I was very good with figures, with numbers, always. I was fascinated, by numbers. And I went to work for him, and I really did pretty good in accounting. I was assigned certain accounts, and I went to them and, did the books every month, closed it to what was then called the trial balance. Mm-hmm. Do you know what a trial balance is? Mm-hmm. Okay. And did that. As a matter of fact, one of the accounts with the Lemley Theaters, and I just read that they did a partnership with that theater that shows the foreign, where they...
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they went into partnership.
Oh, they did.
That was one of my accounts. I went there.
Yeah.
So I worked for him. And then I thought seriously about going into accounting, but I didn't want to study. I just was too lazy. I mean, that kind of thing came naturally to me, and I didn't want to do that. And I started working as bookkeepers, full-time, full-charge bookkeepers. And that was a pretty good profession there. And
just on your own, kind of. I mean, you weren't necessarily working for someone.
I worked for Silvestri Studios, and I worked there. And through them, he wanted to open a studio on the Sunset Strip. He asked me to open it for him and be there. And I got into retailing, which was my first love. I wanted to, when I first came to New York, that's what I really wanted to do. But I couldn't get a job without experience, and I couldn't get experience without a job. So, and they made sort of decorative items.
Who was this now?
Silvestri Studios. And they, one of their clients...
What did they make?
So statuary and lamps, out of plastic, poured out of plaster of Paris. And what you used to do with teeth, they did with decorative molds and decorative items. And I met Don Loper, who's a designer through them. I did a lot of work with him through Silvestri Studios. But I also met somebody who was with Bullock's, a designer for Bullock's. And I asked him if he could possibly get me a job there, because I think it's a wonderful store and it's my first love. And he did, and he got me a job as a Christmas extra in 1951. And it was a long Christmas, and I worked there till 86. I interrupted for 3 years when I had my kids. That's how I got to Bullock's. I mean, you know who the designer was, as a matter of fact? He had a big studio here, Arthur Elrod. You might have heard that name, And I befriended, and I said, Arthur, you could really help me. And Bullock's thought very highly. He worked for Bullock's here in the Palm Springs store. And I was so smitten with Palm Springs, I said, when I retire, that's where I'm going to live. And I did.
When's the first time you came to Palm Springs?
Well, maybe 49, after the war. Mm-hmm. This was a playground. I stayed at the Howard Manor. When I had a weekend off, which I didn't have too much. In those days, you worked 6 days, and every other week. So I'd pack a little suitcase and drive out, and, there was a whole group of our get together.
Yes.
And, there were Arthur's friends. There was one group, but they were a lot of fun. But I couldn't get any boyfriends there because they were all gay. Right. Arthur's group. Yes. But I loved them. But then at the Howard Manor, I'd meet guys.
Yeah.
So.
Real guys. Huh?
Real guys.
So. Were you at the same Bullock store in
I
LA?
worked downtown. I worked in LA. Then I made enough money in commission. I was selling...
That's what I meant to ask you. What did you...
Well, I sold furniture because, I was kind of in the home store. And I made good money. I was a very good salesperson. And I made enough money, so in 52 I took a leave of absence to go to Israel and stop in Europe on the way. I wanted to see what Europe was there post-war. That's where I spent one day in Germany. And the money, my mother kept on sending me these checks she got from Bullock's, So instead of 6 weeks, I stayed there. After 3 months, and I still have that telegram, I got a telegram from Bullock's. I had already told them I want to become a furniture buyer. In those days, each store had their own buyer. I got a telegram if I'm interested in coming back to the United States, there is an opening for me as a buyer. So I telegraphed back that I still had wanted to be in Paris for a couple of weeks, as long as my money was there, you know. And I came back and I became what was then called a unit buyer in Westwood. As I said before, Federated bought the company. Each stores had their own buyer. And then in '67, when Federated bought Bullock's, their head was a central buyer. And even though I was the only woman, I got that job. But I was the best one, really. The others, you know, they were...
So in 1967, you were the buyer for all the stores?
For all the stores. There were only 9 stores then. So, and I had a very nice career with Bullock's.
Now you ended up, you worked for the Bullocks here, didn't you?
No, what happened when I was getting ready, I wanted to retire in '83, and I had enough stock options and that sort of thing. And they said, look, we have this, I know you want to go to the desert, and we have that store on the boards. And they made it really worth my while. They said, would you be interested in opening it? This is a new trading area. I was a buyer and merchant until my kids became teenager, and I asked them to put me to store management so I didn't have to travel. I didn't want to travel anywhere. So they said, we have this new stores and new trading area. And they made it, as a matter of fact, they paid my rent in one of the tennis condos in Mission Hills, you know, for a year. Would you open this store? And then, you know, you can retire. I did. I opened the store, but I stayed till '86. It was a lot of fun working. I opened the store in the mall. And that was, you know, in Bullock's I was a buyer, I was a merchandise manager, I traveled. I didn't travel too much, but I had to travel 3 times a year, once to Europe and twice to North Carolina. And I didn't want to do that when the kids were teenagers.
And, okay, how many children do you have?
2.
And what's their names?
Danny is the oldest, and he has 3 children, and Gina, which is Sarah's mother, and she has 3 children.
And when were they born?
Danny was born in 1957.
Now, the actor who was...
He's out of the, he's gone.
Oh, okay,
He was gone when I was 22 years old.
Okay, so
he
who,
was
okay,
gone.
well,
John Beal. I met John Beal.
What did he do?
He worked for the phone company, second generation, you know, in the engineering department, the cable, whatever, you know, the long distance cables department.
Yeah.
And I married him in '56, and Danny was born in '57, and Gina was born in 1960. And I settled down finally. So, yeah.
Did your husband pass away?
No, well, he's dead now, but we never got divorced. As a matter of fact, he passed away 4 years ago now. And I was still the wife on record, so they wouldn't even move the body without
You were just separate.
We were separated all the years and very good friends all the years. And, you know, as a matter of fact, whenever I traveled, I had a housekeeper, but he always moved into the house so they'd have at least one parent there, you know. So we had that kind of a relationship. Yeah, he was a nice guy, really nice guy. I just, he was an alcoholic, and I just couldn't deal with it. You know, I just couldn't deal with it. But he didn't ever admit it. As a matter of fact, when he died, you know, it's the coroner's report. I had to have an autopsy because he, you know, he wasn't sick. He was just found dead. So it was amazing. After all these years, they've been separated after 30 years. Over 30 years, the coroner wouldn't move the body without my okay. That, you know, there's strange rules.
Yeah. And what does Danny do?
Danny's a musician, a keyboard player, piano, and that's how he supports his family.
And
But he really makes his money in real estate.
Oh.
Yeah, he made some good investments in real estate. But he doesn't spend that money. He's very thrifty.
Where does he live?
In Idaho. Boise, Idaho. We just bought last year.
Boise, did you say?
Yeah, we bought a 32-acre farm, a working farm. He doesn't work it, it's a lease. And two good kids.
And Gina lives up in
Lake Tahoe, South Lake Tahoe. She works for Caesars. She works in the purchasing department now. She's been reservation, she's been accounting, she's been security. Gina can't stay in any job too long. She gets bored. I'm just glad she works for the same firm. And a firm like Caesars has all of these opportunities.
Yeah.
They posted each week what openings they have, and then the employees go by, and if they're bored in one, they pick another one. But that way they manage to keep their staff. She's been there for about 8 years now, 8 or 9 years.
And when did you meet that nice Indiana boy, Fred?
Fred was my boss.
He was?
He was my boss. I believe in being friendly with your boss.
Excuse me?
I believe in being friendly.
Oh,
with
yeah,
your
why,
boss.
sure. For bullocks, then, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Was my boss. He didn't like me. I didn't like him. I thought he was anti-Semitic. I just disliked him very much. He tried to get me fired. I couldn't.
Oh. This was in L.A.?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why did he want to fire you?
Well, we were still unit buying, and we were in a bonus system, and we were not supposed to exchange the amounts, how much we were making. And except his buyer, furniture buyer, I were very close friends. And we decided we were going to exchange the information, but nobody's to know. Well, it turned out I got $1,000 more than he got, and so he went up to Fred, who was his boss, and said, don't you think I ought to get, and so Fred, this was like a mortal sin. He went to the president, and one day I'm getting a call from the president. Do you know Lou Cohn? Yes. Do you ever talk to Lou Cohn? Yes. I said, I bet you're going to ask me whether I exchanged information. I was wrong, but yes, I did it. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. So he says, well, what can I say now? and that president lives now in Palm Desert, so I'm friendly with him. So anyway, but Fred tried, he said, well, it was the only way I could get rid of you. But it didn't work.
Didn't work.
Didn't work. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it is.
Isn't it? I had absolutely no respect for him, and he had absolutely thought I was just a loudmouth broad. And then they wanted me to go to once we became centralized around the way, which means, and he became the central merchandise manager. They wanted me to go to work for him. I said, I'm not going to work for that son of a bitch. And I remember my boss saying, you don't talk that way about one of my colleagues, And I said, well, you have to go down and interview with him. And if he wants to interview with me, he can come out. I was in Sherman Oaks at this time. Kenny says, no, you're going down. I really didn't want to go to work for him. But when I heard, as a matter of fact, I didn't want to go downtown, and I asked one of my suppliers, who I was very friendly with, I made $10,000 then, this in 67. And I said, I don't want to go there. What am I going to do? I can't say no. You're not, to a firm. And he says, just ask him to double your salary. He says, then, but go for that. I'm going to pay you $10,000. Ask for $20,000. Go down. I said, I want $20,000. And I go down. They said, okay. So, would you believe this? But I must tell you, the other 8 buyers were really worthless.
No.
They didn't have much of a choice. But I didn't think they would take it.
Yeah.
I didn't think they would just say, okay.
Yeah.
They said, it's double what you're making now. I said, yes.
So when did you and Fred finally become a little friendlier?
After I started working with him, and I found out he wasn't really such a bad guy, and he found out that I wasn't really so bad after all, So And I started making money for the company, and I was a feather in his cap, so we became friendly.
And Sarah, I know she likes Fred a lot, doesn't she?
Oh yeah, that's her, the only grandpa she really knows, and she adores him, so he.
And she's kind of been living with you off and on, kind of for.
No, she's just the last 2 years,
2 years. I mean, the last couple of
Yeah,
years.
a couple of years. The school, she had a very bad school record. I don't know if I told you, her grade average was 0.5. Now she ended up with 3.29. Her mother has a very disorganized life. Now she's separated, but there is no decent schooling up. It's a very transient kind of society that lives up there, with them.
Right.
And we just felt, her mother and I, that she needs a more orderly life. She needs somebody to be around her. I keep her on a pretty short leash, So, and it was hard for her in the beginning. She's very fond of her mother. She loves her mother to stay with me. But she also sees all of the benefits. Plus, she gets spoiled. She doesn't have any chores really to speak of. Hanging up her clothes or putting it in the is already a big, she knows I like to do that. And it just worked out fine.
Well, she's fitting in here at the Air Museum real well.
Is she?
Oh, she is, yeah.
She is socially very
and she's kind of a take charge person.
Is she?
Yeah, she really is.
I don't know that
ask,
size.
As far as if you ask her to do something, she'll just go and.
Oh, she'll do it. She'll do anything. When we go home now, she's babysitting again. I told you last week she was babysitting 2 evenings. She made $135.
6 kids one night.
Yeah, but she handles them, and she saw we were sitting in the living room, and she sees the little girl next door going to the lake, and we didn't see that she had any supervision, but parents were sitting. She said, how can they let that little girl? And she runs out, and then she saw that the parents, they didn't just let her go.
Now, I know that you have, tell me, I know that you're involved with the Children's Museum.
Yeah,
How did you get involved with that?
I got a call one time, no, that's not so. They were talking about opening a children's museum, and kind of has the support of the City of Rancho Mirage, and the first meeting was held in City Hall. And somebody thought I ought to go to that meeting. My friend Anita Richmond, it's the Anita Richmond. And I went there, and I listened to this. There were 2 teachers, and I thought, well, that ain't going to ever happen here, a children's museum. But then they asked me to be part of it and be on the board. That's all there was, a board for 2 years, 3 years. And I did. So now I'm the only remaining board member that was one of the original founders, So that's how I got involved in it. And of course I've seen changes and
You're pleased with the way everything's gone?
Oh, yeah. And Anita's husband was the biggest donor, more so than Annenberg. Everybody talks about Annenberg, who gave us the land and then made it up to $1 million and just gave us another $250,000. But Howie Richmond gave much more than that. He's already over $1.5 million, So, and Ed Johnson. Did you know Ed?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he was on the Eisenhower, was president of the Eisenhower board, and passed away just recently. So that's how I got involved. Did you get the invitation that I sent? I sent an invitation to we have a pitch-in once a year for the pitching for the kids, where some golf pro, they're pitching balls and it's a dinner.
Really?
It's a real fun kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen it yet.
Well, I sent it yesterday. It was the day before.
Okay.
But it's a real fun kind of sit-down dinner, and it's a lot of people get involved in it.
Now I know Fred works out at the Living Desert.
No,
Are you involved with that?
No, no, I cannot become a volunteer. I will not commit any time, not like you, Yeah. So I just cannot do that. I've committed all my life, and that is. But Fred, I don't know if you know, he has a bone marrow test. Ever since last year,
Well, I know he's been. He was telling me. He's
yeah, I know. He said every heart test, stress test, every imaginable test, everything is perfect. And I keep on saying, when he fell, I said, all right, I know you can treat a blood clot, but what causes it? And he's getting weaker and weaker. And he had another incident last week, and he went into emergency, and they took a blood test, and his white blood count is down to 1,000. What is it supposed to be? 10,000, 20,000, something like that. And they admitted him to the hospital, except he couldn't go in because he didn't have a room, a bed. Did you believe this? I didn't have a bed. So he stayed for 6 hours. After 6 hours, he called the doctor. He's now with my doctor. And said, look, take the tests on an outpatient. So we went over to see her. By that time it was like 5:30 at night, and we still didn't have a room from 9 o'clock in the morning, like 10 o'clock. So she sent him over to Dr. Foss of Hematology, so he has to see a hematologist. So we saw him, and he said, we've got to make sure.
So they're still doing tests, still
on Thursday's going in. He did all of his blood tests and all of it, and Thursday's getting the bone marrow extracted, which is that a difficult thing?
I don't think so.
Because they're of course worried about leukemia. That's the worry there, So
the other thing I know that you do is go to schools and talk about your experiences and the Holocaust. How did that go?
What amazed me about that group was when I asked them, I always tell them they can interrupt me at any time. I don't speak from a script, and I can do that. And after that, I said, do you have any questions? And the only question I told them I worked as a domestic. One of the girls said, what's a domestic? And I was really amazed at that. Not the fact that she didn't know what a domestic was, I could understand,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But that was the only question they had. And not how did you feel, none of that. Unlike the Germans, when I spoke in the German school.
That's right. Tell me about some of that. Where you?
I befriended a teacher. I get the paper from Frankfurt, like the Senior Bulletin. Mm-hmm. And about 10 years ago, there was a little thing. They said there's a teacher who wants to do research. Everything has been done about the Holocaust, but nobody really addressed the children of the Holocaust. The young people who were born, and it gave the time frame when I was born, who were children when Hitler came, and he is doing a lot of study and research, and if you're interested, get in touch with him. So I got in touch with him. As a matter of fact, I found him so interesting in his work. The next year when we went to Switzerland, I made a special trip into Frankfurt to meet with him. So anyway, he's an interesting man. And then when I took Danny to Germany, Danny always said, what did you do? He's very interested in my life there. So I said, look, if your wife lets you go, I'll invite you to go with me. So we went, and I spoke to his school, and they were same age as the high school students. And it was interesting. One of the young men came to me afterwards, not in class, and he said, I asked my grandfather, this is now the third generation already we're talking about the Holocaust and Hitler, and he says, he wasn't part of it and he knows nothing about it. And he says, Mrs. Beal, I just don't believe him. I know he was part of it. Everybody was part of it. And that was really amazing to me to hear. But they asked a lot of questions about mainly not just happenings, but feelings. How does it make a kid feel if you can't do this and you can't do that? So also, I've been to the Coachella High School and I've been to the Cathedral City High School more as a moderator. And I've been to the Yucca Valley. Yucca Valley was really interesting. The students, there were 5, 6 of us. The students had to do essays about the Holocaust in history, and they had to act them out. And they did this. So afterwards, there was a panel of us, 6 of the survivors. Some of them were in concentration camp, people like myself been deported, somebody who just lived there, And we almost couldn't get out. There were so many questions. And I wonder why there were, and I'd rather have a feeling there weren't any questions because it was a spur of the moment kind of a thing. It was a last minute. All of the other, like in Coachella, Cathedral City, Yucca Valley was a whole production. And then I got a lot of letters from the students, thanking, but they were prepared.
Yeah.
They were giving the historical facts beforehand. And I kind of had the feeling I was just sort of sprung on them.
Maybe, I don't know. I know Bob was going to try, what they're trying to do with these is to have someone go at least a day before and tell about who's coming and have them prepare some questions and things so that they know.
There were no
that
questions
maybe that didn't,
no.
he likes to have that done. That might not have happened.
No, because it was
case.
it was because I talked to him on Monday and he says, would you by any chance have time? And I said, yes. And he said, usually, they're just some old soldiers or pilots or, talking veterans, and it would be interesting. And
was that an ROTC class that you spoke to?
2. There was 1, and so I don't know, but all of the others, they had cards with questions, which makes it much easier for me. Like it's easy to answer questions.
Yes.
It's. I tried to put it into context, both personal and a little bit of history, But I started out by saying I was 11 years old and I lived there from 11 till 17. I wanted to put it into the context of their age.
Their age, yeah.
Which I think is important.
Yeah.
That. But as I said, the only question I got is, what's a domestic? And I also had a sense, and I wouldn't tell Bob that it was not as bright a class. I don't know why I had that feeling. I didn't have that feeling in Coachella. I didn't have that feeling in Yucca Valley. And I didn't have that feeling in Cathedral City. In Coachella, I moderated. There were people who were in camps, 2 people. And as a matter of fact, they had me there to moderate the questions.
Oh, yeah.
There were that many questions that I could do what a moderator does. And in Cathedral City, I just did the introductions of 1 because they're mostly people who have been in camps and,
I see.
who've spent considerable time. And this is what that teacher in Germany tried to get away. He tried to see how did the children react, what happened to them, what are they doing now, So when I was invited by the city of, did I tell you we were invited by the city of Frankfurt 3 years ago?
You were talking about, I knew you were going somewhere.
Yeah, well, we were invited, and we stayed at a 5-star hotel, Steigenberger Hotel, top hotel, free airfare. We even were given 700 marks spending money, which was then about $500. free passes on public transport. I mean, really treated the mayor, who at the first reception, the first day, started out by saying, we have not invited you here to make amends. There is no way we can amends for what we've done to you. We invited you to meet the people now. We invited you to show you that we are a different people, which was, I thought, a very interesting approach, and certainly, that showing that they were different people. And this teacher is very, very active, doing a couple of programs. He's a music teacher, in there with his students. And the students call themselves the Arbeitsgemeinschaft, the working group against anti-Semitism. Working student, the group of working students, I can't translate it, against anti-Semitism. And they have done all of the research. I mean, they know a lot more than I do what happens, and the teacher started this. He went into the archives one day just to look for something, and the Germans keep a piece of paper for everything. And he found all of this material, what happened to the students and some of the Nazi teachers who were still teaching, and he found all of that. And he brought all of that material up and, got some students involved, and they were classifying it and made it current material. Now, he wasn't very well liked in the school. It's like, did you see the film The Nasty Girl? This girl in Germany after the war who wanted to find out what all of these people did, like the mayor, and she was called, this was also shown in the film festival many years back. So anyway, he did that, and that group of children with a teacher compiled a list of all over 1,100 children between the age of birth and 19 who were deported or killed or both by the Nazis, and they had that list blown up, and they got the city to post it on a municipal building. This list of 1,100 children, what happened to them? Not the ones like myself who left. And reading the list, he sent it to me before I even saw it. I saw it in the building. A lot of the teenagers committed suicide. Teenagers. The older ones or the younger ones were deported and died in concentration camps, but the percentage of suicides were primarily amongst the teenagers, which I found kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's done all of this work with his students. So, and I'm still very friendly with him, whenever I go there. So we were there last year. We were going out for an evening of fun, he and his wife, and then just have a ball.
You hear about how a lot of the Germans today deny that, the Holocaust either went on or was as bad as it really was or things like that, but you didn't see any evidence of that when you were in France.
Let me tell you, not this generation. The generation prior to this, the children of the perpetrators, who were still in denial because they didn't hear anything or they heard distorted stories. Now it's being taught, it's mandatory as part of the history, the German history in Germany. And this generation, they know Hitler dragged them into the war. They know what he's done, and they all, like one of them said to me, I said, how do you feel about it? What would you have done? And he said, I certainly hoped if I would have been alive then, it wouldn't have happened. This generation is like totally different from when I first went there in 52, they were still my contemporaries. We were, 30 years old, 31. Some of them were too young, some of them were children in the war, some of them were in the war, They you kind of know we didn't know anything about it. Heck, Dachau is outside of Munich. The stench covered the city of the burning bodies, and they pretended they didn't know. Not now anymore. They are totally, sure they're neo-Nazis. They still think, some of them, but you have, look up in Idaho.
Yeah.
So
They're everywhere.
you have that everywhere. You can't. But the German, I feel very comfortable in Germany. I don't feel comfortable with my contemporaries, but there are not very many living there. I just look at them and I kind of undress them and put them into uniform immediately. So.
Was that 3? Have you been to Germany since?
Oh yeah, I've been there last year.